While at the same time, the White House is throwing down tariffs, the ambassador is lambasting us, the president is referencing us as the 51st state. How do you reconcile that for Canadians? Why are we handing that leverage over, Minister?
So let me give you a little bit of a history lesson.
What's up, you guys, and welcome back. My name's Natasha, and this is Behavior Breakdowns. As always, I'm joined by my co-host PJ. And today we are taking a look at the body language and behavior of Vassy Kapelos. Vassy is the chief political correspondent for CTV News, and she is also an award-winning Canadian journalist. A lot of you have been discussing Vassy in the comments section and wondering whether or not she is somebody that we as Canadians can trust. We're going to be taking a look at a recent conversation as Vassy interviews the Energy and Natural Resource Minister Tim Hodgson. A couple of you had pointed out this particular interview in the community tab, and you guys were talking about some of the unusual body language that you saw both from Kapelos and from Hodgson. So it's going to be a really interesting one for us to break down, and I'm excited to get into it. Now, Vassy is both an excellent and strategic political journalist, and you're going to see in this interview just how good she is at showing very little facial expressions. But nobody is immune, and body language always leaks out. We're going to be taking a look at this video, and let's find out if there's any sorts of tells. Let's see if we can determine what Vassy's really feeling, and let's also call out some of the odd behavior and body language that we see from Tim Hodgson.
G7 energy ministers just finished meeting in Toronto, which is where we find Federal Energy and Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson. Hi, Minister. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our program. Thank you so much for making the time.
Pleasure to be here.
Minister, your announcement this week on critical minerals is to better position the G7 to counter non-market dominance. That's, of course, China. At the same time, though, Prime Minister Mark Carney has just met with President Xi and expressed great enthusiasm for what your government is calling a strategic partnership with China. Why are we broadening a relationship with a country we just invoked the Defense Production Act to ward against?
Now, my apologies for the ever-changing light here. It's obviously a very windy day out today, and there's still a lot of leaves on the trees, so things are shifting and blowing around, and the light is changing quite drastically. So I do have an external light here to try and help mitigate some of that changing light, but it is what it is. Let's start by looking at Tim Hodgson's blink rate. Now, an increase in blink rate is a really good indicator of increasing stress.
Non-market dominance. That's, of course, China. At the same time, though, Prime Minister Mark Carney has just met with President Xi. And
in that first initial clip, we have Vassy greeting Tim, and the energy feels really warm and welcoming.
Hi, Minister. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our program. Thank you so much for making the time.
Now, let's watch Tim Hodgson's blink rate and watch how quickly it changes as he begins to understand where the conversation is going.
Announcement this week on critical minerals is to better position the G7 to counter non-market dominance. That's, of course, China. At the same time, though, Prime Minister Mark Carney has just met with President Xi and expressed great enthusiasm for what your government is calling a strategic partnership with China.
On the words China, we see a spike in Tim's blink rate. Now, of course, there are a number of reasons why someone's blink rate may increase. Perhaps their eyes have dried out, perhaps their contact slipped. We can get a good baseline of someone's blink rate by observing them in the context of the situation, counting their blinks per minute or even per 15 seconds and multiplying that number by 4. And when you start to see deviation from that blink rate, when you see an increase in that blink rate, specifically an increase upon certain words or conversations, you can begin to understand that there might be some underlying stress less involved. Flipping over to Vassy, we do see her eyes narrow slightly. That can be a bit of scrutinization towards an idea or an opinion. We also hear a bit of an exaggeration on the word great.
President Xi and expressed great enthusiasm.
It almost feels like there is a touch of sarcasm in that word. I would say that Vassy perhaps does not actually feel as though it's great because we hear that over-exaggeration, we hear that overemphasis on that word.
So, look, my job and what everyone was doing today at the G7 is focusing on energy security and security of our supply chains. We weren't there talking about individual countries and non-market actors. What we were there talking about was the real-world reality that our G7 democracies and many like-minded countries face real challenges with secure supply chains. And I have to tell you, this was made so real to all of us as we sat at dinner last night with our friend and colleague, the Minister of Energy from the Ukraine.
Also see some shoulder shrugs from Tim Hodgson as he goes to respond to Vassy's question. It looks like a single shoulder shrug and then it goes to a double shoulder shrug. Now we know shoulder shrugging comes around the idea of uncertainty and feeling a lack of confidence in answering those questions. It can also mean indifference. We see Hodgson looking up here. This could also be a spot that he goes to retrieve specific information. A lot of eye accessing cues have been debunked. People used to say that if you looked right or left, that must indicate that you were lying. We know that's not true, but what we can gather from eye accessing cues is that people generally go to specific places to access specific information. Now, sometimes that information is numerical, sometimes that information is more visual, and depending on where someone's eyes go, you can begin to get a better understanding of where they keep certain information and data.
And as we were talking about our families and the niceties that you would talk about at a dinner, the minister of the Ukraine was scrolling through her emails, trying to understand how many transmission facilities were destroyed last night, how many gas transmission facilities were destroyed last night, and just to put an even finer point on it, how many workers who were out there repairing those substations or gas plants were murdered as they were trying to repair them by the Russian drones. That is what we are facing in the world today. It is our responsibility to make sure we have secure energy and secure supply chains. That's what we were focused on.
We do see some illustrative body language here as Tim Hodgson says scrolling through the phone, and he makes that visual gesture. That's generally a good sign. When people are being deceptive, it's a lot harder to come up with that body language if it's not something that they actually witnessed. Now, did Tim Hodgson see that exact minister doing that exact gesture? Or did at some point he look around and notice some people scrolling on their phones? Either of those things could be true, but we do see a lot of congruency here with the rest of Tim Hodgson's body language. We also have Hodgson here emphasizing the word murdered.
Or gas plants were murdered.
Hodgson looks to create an impact by emphasizing that word, and Vassy is locked down. She doesn't, her blink rate does not increase. She doesn't flinch. We don't see any sort of tells coming off of her face. In fact, I think she is just meditating in this space right now and looking like she doesn't believe a word that Tim Hodgson has to say. Now, Hodgson finishes by saying, "That's what we were focused on. on, and we see this shoulder kind of shrug back. It's a bit of a shoulder shrug mixed with some retraction. He kind of tosses his head to the side and the shoulders go back as well. Based on my body language experience, I would be skeptical of that statement and the truth behind that statement.
Chains. That's what we were focused on.
If that's all that they were focused on, Tim Hodgson should be able to say that with confidence. He should be able to say that in a way where his body language doesn't betray the words that he says. We saw him using his hands before. We saw him using his gestures more strategically. So why is it that when he says this is all that we were focused on, we see some unusual changes in his body language?
With respect, Minister, I do take your point on, especially as you describe the situation in Ukraine. I listened to your entire press conference this afternoon. There were at least two different instances in which you did refer to non-market actors. You also talked about being serious about market concentration. You are referencing China. And Kananaskis, that's what the G7 was talking about. How do you reconcile for Canadians that you are invoking, of doing something very serious and invoking the Defense Production Act on an issue of national security, while at the same time, 12 hours earlier, the Prime Minister is saying we're going to pursue a reset with China? How do you reconcile that?
So we want to trade with many countries. I am not the Minister of Trade. I'm going to leave that to Prime Minister Carney. I'm going to leave that to Minister Sidhu. I know Minister Anand is involved with the discussions in China. What I am focused on doing is ensuring we have diversity of supply. It is in no country's interest, what we heard from all the G7 members today, including other allied countries like Australia, that it is in none of our interests to have the vast majority of production or processing with one particular country.
Vassy goes to refer to her paperwork and she breaks that eye contact with Tim Hodgson, and therefore she misses that sigh that happens when she says there were two instances of non-state actors. Tim's shoulders raise and we see a sigh come out. Now, deep sighs like that can often help calm the nervous system. Again, if somebody is feeling stressed or their breath has been constricted, they just need to let out a nice big sigh and it generally feels good. So we do see that sigh happening from Tim. Also still are seeing a increase in Tim's blink rate.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to understand on behalf of Canadians the national security imperative that you laid out. When you talk about a wake-up call, I did want to also ask you on this issue, because it does appear that we are closely aligning ourselves to the United States, not just with the announcement that you made today, but also the U.S. government has taken an ownership stake in two Canadian critical mineral companies. There's a recent deal that'll see Cameco again give the U.S. government increased access to Canadian uranium. Why are we handing the White House so much of our leverage with these strategic assets?
Let me repeat for your viewers again: 26 different deals with 9 different countries, with every single G7 country, along with other allied countries from 4 different continents. The vast majority of those deals were with countries other than the United States. The United States did participate in that. We want them to. We believe in multilateralism. We believe that our supply chains will be more robust if we have many off-takers, not one or two. And this is a win. So I fundamentally reject your premise. What we are doing is aligning ourselves with the G7. We are aligning ourselves with a multilateral approach to solving this problem.
Vassy starts to press Tim Hodgson a little bit more. And we also see Tim Hodgson's mouth fall open. Now he is waiting for his turn to speak. He's waiting for his turn to jump in. He doesn't even want to let Vassy finish. His mouth is already open, ready to jump in and interrupt before she can finish her statement. And then we see that tongue jut. So if you don't know what a tongue jut is, I also call it the lizard that That is when the tongue pokes out of the mouth. Now, this body language gesture has really interesting origins. It has to do with pushing the food out of the mouth when we are infants, when we are no longer hungry. We push the nipple or we push the bottle away. We carry that gesture into adulthood and we see it come out around the idea of distaste. So we see Hodgson make that lizard gesture there.
Is that what, in your view, China is doing when it comes to critical minerals? And that is why you had to do what you did today?
Look, it's lost on none of us at the G7 that a few weeks ago, Japan put export restrictions on multiple critical minerals. China put export restrictions on multiple critical minerals that are absolutely core to the functioning of our economies. My understanding is that is paused, but that, Vassy, is a wake-up call. That is a wake-up call that we should never we should never allow ourselves to be put in that situation. We are correcting that.
Vassy is looking pretty intense here. Again, we see the eyebrows raised and the eyes slightly widened. Her face remains pretty still. And I zoomed in to get a better look at what was going on Vassy's face. I noticed that she's actually reading from a teleprompter. You can see the eyes going back and forth very slightly. Now, she might be getting a feed coming from Tim Hodgson, so she might be reading the words as he's saying it, or it might be that she has been instructed to ask specific questions, and those specific questions are coming out on the teleprompter in front of her. But when we zoom in, we see the eyes going back and forth. She is reading something from a monitor in front of her. When Tim Hodgson says, "My understanding is that it's paused."
My understanding is that is paused.
And we hear that upward inflection when he says that. Now, when there's an upward inflection at the end of a sentence, when somebody previously hasn't been speaking with upward inflections, we can get an understanding that that statement may actually be more of a question than it is a statement, because that's how it's appearing in that person's mind. There is an upward inflection, as in this is a question and not a statement. So when Tim Hodgson says, "It's my understanding that that is paused," there's a question mark at the end of that sentence.
My understanding is that is paused.
Saying that it's my understanding is a really safe way to go about making a statement, because it guarantees that you are not explicitly saying yes or no. You're saying, well, it's my understanding, and my understanding could be wrong. When we hear that combined with the upward inflection on the word paused, again, that gives me reason to believe there is something more happening here that Tim is not fully expressing.
The U.S., though, has been spearheading for a long time, trying to prompt actions from allies, traditional allies, I should say, to counter China's dominance in the critical mineral space. I combine the announcement today, and I take your point that it is a multilateral effort, with three other announcements, which give the U.S. government specifically increased access to strategic assets in this country. While at the same time, the White House is throwing down tariffs, the ambassador is lambasting us, the president is referencing us as the 51st state. How do you reconcile that for Canadians? Why are we handing that leverage over, Minister?
So let me give you a little bit of a history lesson. For the last many years, people have been talking about the challenges of critical mineral supply chains. It was our prime minister. It was our prime minister who was the head of the G7 in Kananaskis in Alberta, who said Canada will take the lead.
Now, when Hodgson says, "Let me give you a little bit of a history lesson," we need to zoom in here on Vassy's face, because it is subtle, but it is there. Watch the facial expressions change. This is disbelief that Hodgson just said what he said.
So let me give you a little bit of a history lesson.
We actually see her jaw tighten there. The eyebrows go up ever so slightly and the mouth comes together a bit more tight. That look to me says, do not play me a fool, Mr. Hodgson. Watch Tim's blink rate when we see traditional allies. He also shuffles around in his seat every time China has been brought up in this conversation. We see Tim showcasing body language that suggests he is uncomfortable. So he pulls back there. He also does an eye block. Eye blocking happens when somebody no longer wants to be a part of a conversation. They use their eyelids as a barrier to close out that information, close out that stimulus.
Thank you, Minister, for the history lesson, but it doesn't address the substance of my question around why we are allowing the U.S. government, not U.S. companies, the U.S. government, increased access to strategic assets at a time when we are engaged in a trade war, at a time when the Prime Minister has specifically said the relationship as we know it with the United States as far as economic and security interdependence is over. Is that not the converse of what your party and your government has told Canadians?
Again, I don't think you have it. It's accurate. We have never said we don't want to trade with Americans. Americans have been great trading partners. What we've said is we want to diversify and grow our trading relationships. What the Prime Minister has said is we will significantly grow our trading relationships with other allies who share our values.
Now we see Vassy, looks like her shoulders have actually gone back and her neck is raised. She's not shrinking away. We don't see any body language here to suggest any type of vulnerability or any feelings of stress in this situation. In fact, we see more body language that looks confident. She's able to master those very subtle facial expressions and get back control to not show any type of reaction towards Hodgson's comments.
Colleagues have never said that you're proposing to not keep the relationship where it is with the United States? Because I remember the Prime Minister saying our old relationship we had with the U.S. based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations is over. That is the message, with great respect, Minister, that Canadians received during the campaign and after. I understand that what you did today is about multilateralism, but not everything on the critical mineral file falls into that category. And the examples I provided are about deepening the relationship with a White House, with a U.S. government that has taken direct aim at our country.
So watch those eyebrows on Vassy's face go way up again. This is signaling some disbelief as she asks Hodgson, are you sure about that? Now, one thing that I wish happened here is that I wish Vassy had left the question as it stands. She should have just asked Hodgson outright, are you saying this, yes or no? Now, mind you,
are you sure that you and your party
a long-winded, long tangent response, but the question would have been more powerful if she actually had waited to follow it up with that quote from the Prime Minister, because most of us are familiar that Mark Carney had said the relationship with the United States was going to change and that it would never be the same as it was. When she makes this point to Hodgson, we do see him eye block again. He closes his eyes. Get me away from this conversation. There's another tongue jut. Are you guys calling them out as you're seeing them now? These are coming out every single time Hodgson is put on the spot. Every single time he hears an idea or a conversation that is distasteful, that tongue pokes out of the mouth.
We are going to respond in ways that are good for Canada, and that means we are going to grow our relationships with other like-minded allies. We are going to reduce our dependence on one particular customer. That is good business. That's what any business person would do. That's what this government is doing, because that's what Canadians expect us to do.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that very much today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we finish off there with another tongue jut. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think I counted 5 tongue juts from Tim Hodgson here, and that is an awful lot of tongue juts for one conversation. Keep your eyes open for that tongue jut or the lizard out in the real world, and don't get it confused with lip licking. We will see more lip licking going on now that it's getting colder here in Canada, and with the colder temperatures, people's lips tend to dry out, and you'll see more lip licking happening to keep those lips soft and moisturized. Overall, I think that Vassy is an excellent journalist. If it comes down to a matter of trust, that's really up to you to decide whether or not you want to trust our mainstream journalists. I think it might be useful to continue to watch Vassy here on the channel and continue to break down some of her body language and behavior. She is extremely talented, and for the most part, I think she does a pretty good job at asking questions and remaining politically neutral. I think it's safe to say that Tim's body language was leaking out at a much higher rate than Vassy's was. Now, Tim was not reading from a teleprompter. Tim might not have had the questions prepared. He might not have known what questions were going to be asked, so he might have been more on the spot. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Is Vassy the type of journalist that you guys want to see more of in mainstream media, or would you prefer if somebody was a bit more politically left or politically right? Let me know in the comments below. As always, you guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want to further support the channel, then you can consider becoming a member by clicking the join button down below. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you on the next one. Bye! Who's a good boy? Are you good or are you bad?